You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Good morning and welcome to Old Town Cleveland here on WOOP FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.woopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553. Good morning, Debbie Moore. Tell me what's going on.
Well, good morning, Ron. We're glad that you seem to be a little bit more lively this morning. Your voice is coming.
My throat hasn't disappeared yet.
Yes.
But it's early.
But it's early. I wanted to remind everybody that the Arkansas Pond Stalkers, is that a bluegrass band, Ron?
It sounds like a bluegrass band.
They're going to be down at the Southeastern Bradley Farmers Co-op today at 11 o'clock from 11 to noon. So you can go by there and pick you up some fish for your pond. And then I wanted to remind everybody or tell everybody that next Saturday, October the 28th at 11 a.m., down in the Black Box community in the Triplet Cemetery, the SAR will be having a grave marking ceremony. They have found another Revolutionary War soldier, Private Walter Billingsley. He served in North Carolina, and he was a survivor of the Battle of Waxhaw, also known as Buford's Defeat. That doesn't sound too positive, does it? He was captured a short time later and kept as a POW until his eventual escape. After this service, he served as an Indian spy for the Watauga settlements under the direction of John Sevier. 12 Revolutionary War soldiers are known to be buried in Bradley County, and I think we've located, this may be the fourth one. So, big news. Good time to take your children down, let them see this next Saturday morning, because everybody will be in Revolutionary War attire, and I'm sure it'll be an exciting morning.
And don't forget, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, is it 2 o'clock or 2:30?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Deb has will review her new book at the Bradley County, the Cleveland Bradley Library History Branch.
The old library, we call it.
The old library.
That is beautifully refurbished.
Yes. And she'll show a short 20-minute presentation about the book, and then she'll have a book signing. If you'd like to buy a book, they're $40 per set, or you can just come hear what she has to say.
That's
Either
right.
way, we'd love to see you there. That's at 2 o'clock at the Cleveland Bradley Public Library History Branch.
Hit the ranch. Easy to
Over in
use.
the old Craig Mile
House.
Craig Mile house. I'll get it all done.
It does look great over there now, doesn't it, Ron? We went in there
It
Friday
sure does.
afternoon, and it's they did a really nice job refurbishing that. Also, today and tomorrow, the Apple Festival's going on in downtown Cleveland. Please support that event. Next weekend, the Red Clay will have a powwow. So if you like to watch the Indians come dance in the bright, colorful costumes, it's the time to do that. And I understand our friends that came in a few weeks ago and did talked about the Brainerd Mission play. If you're planning to go to that, it seems like you probably need to go ahead and go online and find those tickets, because I understand they're almost sold out.
Wow, that'd be great.
Yeah. And that's going to be the weekend of the November the 4th, I think. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of that week.
And we got to say a special congratulations
And what is that?
to the Hopewell Student of the Month,
Our granddaughter.
Avery Coleman. She's even got a sign out in front of her house that she is the student of the month out at
For her
Hopewell.
class, yes.
Isn't that great? So congratulations to Avery. I'm sure she's up listening to us like she is ever. Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow, too, at 2 o'clock, I just wanted to mention at the Apple Festival, Mr. Rocket in his Pocket's going to be singing there.
Stan Beavers.
Dan Beaver will be there at 2 p.m., and I know you guys love to listen to his music, and you love when he calls in and talks to us, so be sure to...
Stan is in the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. Lives right here in Cleveland, Tennessee. Was from Ducktown, Tennessee. So it's
we'll be talking about Ducktown here in a few minutes.
the only person from this area that's in the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. It was a pretty big honor there. So his big hit was "Rocket in My Pocket."
Yeah, we love Stan.
We've
And
got that.
We got to get him and
later.
Joel to come back on. They were on here a few years ago, and we had a great time talking to them. Ron, today we have Barry Savage here with us, and Morgan. This is Morgan, our intern.
Morning, Morgan.
This is Barry. I always giggle because he gets here almost at 10 o'clock. Dock your pay, right?
Yes,
Morgan came to be with us as an intern for 6 weeks, and he ended up, what's that, a year and a half ago, Morgan?
about 2 years.
Almost 2 years.
February.
So now we don't call him an intern anymore. We say he's part of the program, and he's really helped out when Ron was sick and came in and took control of all the buttons, and I appreciate that because I don't push the buttons. Well, we have Barry Savage with us today, and tell us what your job is. Out in the real world where they write you a check, what is your job?
Exactly right. Right now, I'm manager of the Survey Products Group at TVA.
Excellent.
And what we do is we do all the mapping in the valley. I work with 11, 12 surveyors and technicians in the office. And we do all the mapping whenever there's a transmission line, and we prepare the legal descriptions for the documents. When you get easements, we map the reservoirs, that type of thing. And I've been doing that for about 14 years. And then before that, 10 years before that, I ran a private survey company here in town, Savage Surveying and Mapping.
Mary walked in the door, and for probably 15 minutes, we talked nonstop. I have lots of questions for somebody who knows about surveying. Let me start out with, down at Red Clay,
Yes.
where'd that line used to be? The Tennessee state line.
Down that far at Red Clay,
The Georgia-Tennessee deal, do you think it was where it is now, or was it somewhere else?
well, originally, there's a principle in surveying, and a lot of people have trouble understanding this.
I have trouble understanding
Yes,
this.
that the southern line of the state of Tennessee was supposed to be the 35th degree of latitude. That's the way it was set up. Tennessee was once part of North Carolina.
Yes.
And so, and even today, when a surveyor goes out and lays out a line for the first time originally, if he or she, wherever they put it in the ground the first time, and people accept it there, that's where it goes, whether the measurements match or not. As a matter of fact, courts all over the country have said for years that measurements are actually the last thing you look at when you're trying to recreate an old line. So that line was actually put in place, and it was put in place incorrectly based on what the measurements should have been.
Okay.
But once it was put in place and everyone accepted it and acquiesced to it and started using that line, then it becomes the line, whether the measurements match or not.
Okay.
Now,
so
that's-
that's the argument. Okay.
That's the argument. Now, Georgia doesn't like that. But
They want our waters.
They want the water. That's right. And they even went back when I ran surveyed the Tennessee-Georgia state line. I even went back and found, I think it was Governor Carl Sanders, and emailed him. He was a private attorney now in somewhere in Atlanta. And I even contacted him because in 1961, when he was the governor of Georgia, they actually filed suit with the Supreme Court trying to get the line moved.
Okay.
And it didn't go anywhere.
Well, let me tell you the thought in the back of Debbie's head about that. When I gave my presentation in Oklahoma this week, a very knowledgeable man was sitting in the audience, and he said, Debbie, was Red Clay State Park the second council grounds,
Right.
or was it the first? And I figured it had something to do with that state line. I really think it was the second council ground,
Right.
but I don't know where the first one was.
Right. And some of the old maps, that's what we were talking about that earlier, we can take some of these old maps and match them to new maps, And if there was a location on the old map that showed where the council ground was at, if there was a secondary one or a primary one, we can go back and find that perhaps from the old maps.
Well, I'm kind of thinking that, I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that it could have been Quinn Springs, which is deeper into Bradley County than the one that they're at now.
Right.
And I'm thinking that when the line was settled at that time, then they were able to take hold of where Red Clay State Park is. Is that what you were thinking, Ron?
Yeah, let me just back up a little bit with you there, is that the people listening is that Georgia has claimed that the Tennessee line is a mile off.
Yes, roughly a mile off.
A mile off. So in other words, the lower half of Bradley County, Ducktown, part of Polk County, lower part of Hamilton County, Chickamauga Lake, and then I guess it ends somewhere right along in
Nickajack.
Nickajack, right there. Yeah, that's why I meant Nickajack. Yeah, Nickajack. So they all believe it's a mile this way. In other words, if you are living in Bradley County today, Georgia thinks you ought to be paying Georgia taxes.
That's right.
And they also think they ought to be getting all the water out of the Nickajack Reservoir.
Tennessee River right there, yeah.
That's the last time the big argument come in, when Altoona Lake dried up.
Right.
So, in other words, still today, is that fight still going on today?
Oh, yeah, it rears its ugly head from time to time. It really does.
It's an ongoing discussion.
And they ran the line the first time in 1818, and then 1826, James K-Mac came back and realized that he had misplaced the line. But by that time, it was too late. It was on the ground.
Because it was accepted.
People were using
Now,
the
what
line.
year was that?
1818 is when he first ran the line. And then he came back about 1828. He was a mathematician for the state of Georgia. He came back and he started, actually in his notes it mentions Nickajack, that he was a mile and so many chains above the Nickajack Indian Reservation at the time.
Yeah. Oh, Dragon Canoe over there.
That's right.
That's interesting though. But when I was asked that question, of course I didn't have the answer to it. I just had my thoughts about it. But I thought, oh, Barry's going to be there Saturday. I'm going to ask him. But now you worked a lot on this Georgia Tennessee thing up in Ducktown.
Yes.
And the funny thing to me is on the maps I'll look, and the Ducktown village shows up on the south side of the Ocoee River, which is in Georgia.
Right.
And I've told people far and wide, the old maps, I'd say, that's not right, because that's, well, then I found out I was wrong, because actually some little sliver of the land over there, they claim it to be Tennessee.
Right.
Which is odd, because usually they use rivers and things as boundaries.
Right.
And so we went to Fighting Town Creek, and that's where most of the historians now say that one of the Ducktown villages, and see, a lot of times the villagers would live in one area, and when they run out of supplies there, or it started flooding more than usual, or some enemy came through and ran them off, they just go on the other side of the river, because basically the climate and everything was the same. And so some people claim that Ducktown was on the northern side of the river, and it could have been on both.
Was Ducktown because of the copper? Was that the fight there?
What do you mean as far as?
Well, when the fight, saying we want the line to be a mile over into Ducktown, that got all the big copper mines.
It would. I'm not sure if they were aware of the copper at the time. As far
So
as
that's pre-copper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pre-copper.
Right, pre-copper. Because when he came through there, and it's kind of amazing. It's interesting to compare what K-Mac did, and he got his line off a mile. And I've done work on the Tennessee-Kentucky state line, and it's off up to 8 and 9 miles in some places.
Woo.
But in the mid-1700s,
And you were out on a mule.
yeah,
That's the best
right.
you could do.
Well, in the mid-1700s, Mason and Dixon laid out their line. The famous Mason, and it's only off 900 feet.
Wow.
And it's because of the difference in procedures and tools that they used at the time. But because in this area, when they laid out lines, they used a mariner sextant, like you
What
use
is
on a
that?
ship, like on a ship.
Oh, okay.
A ship, the triangular device, they would measure the altitude to the sun. And whereas Mason and Dixon used a
You
device.
taking notes, Morgan? There's going to be a test at the end.
That's right. And it won't be multiple choice. That's right. No, and there's, but Mason and Dixon used what they called a zenith sector. Now, K-Mac asked for a zenith sector and didn't get it. And what it does is the surveyor would actually lay on his back and would measure at night, and would measure angles to stars. and it's a much more precise way to do it, but it's more mathematically rigorous. And then when they use the sextant, they can only use it at noon, at local apparent noon, or high noon, basically when the sun was directly overhead, and you had that one shot to figure your latitude. And they couldn't measure, of course, when you're in the mountains of East Tennessee, the way the sextant is devised, you're supposed to read angle from the sun to the horizon on the ocean. Well, you can't see the horizon. So they measured to a device called an artificial horizon. And what they would do is they would sit a bowl in front of the surveyor, and they'd pour mercury in it, or a viscous liquid. Sometimes they would use molasses. And they would see the reflection. No joke.
Look at Ron's face. He's
I like
what?
molasses.
Yeah.
Molasses.
But they would use something like mercury usually. Matter of fact, there's notes where they actually talk about using this mercury bowl, and they would measure an angle from the sun to the sun's reflection in that mercury, and that was twice the angle to the horizon. So they just cut that angle in half.
So you said they have to do it right at high noon, right?
Right at high, and seeing the
How do
interesting.
they figure out when high noon
That's
is?
just it. They didn't have atomic clocks, so what they would do is they would just start taking readings a few minutes before, and whatever gave them the greatest angle is when the sun was. So if they missed it a little bit, they could be off hundreds of feet.
I was about to say,
Mary
how
is-
would they measure it with molasses of all things?
Yeah, well, molasses was reflect if they didn't have the mercury, because mercury was.
Barry's the kid I needed to sit next to at school for all this math
Oh,
stuff.
I wasn't that smart at school. Trust me. Trust me.
So
So,
when did when was the very first argument about Georgia, Tennessee not being together?
1828 is when it started. Is when they actually, when K-Mac first came back and said, and he started at the time giving reasons. He said he had bad mathematical astronomical tables and that he didn't get his zenith sector. So the argument started then, and it was kind of off and on because it was a land area issue. And I don't think it really got hot and heavy until recent times when it became a water issue. The land is probably not that big of a deal. But then when you have, but now it's water. And water
Right.
for Atlanta is a big deal.
Well, did also in 1828, Tennessee was predominantly, before that was the Cherokee Nation.
Right.
And, of course, we kept squeezing them down. And when it got to the point where 1828, Georgia's looking like saying, we're just going to take over this Tennessee part that's Cherokee property, which they've already ran over the Cherokee already.
Right.
Could that be part of it? They're just saying, we're going to get the rest of that Cherokee property before
Some of it.
Tennessee gets it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because
it was free property.
that's right. And property issues are always, even in today's world, property issues are always highly emotional.
Yes.
I know that from just,
Oh, my dad walked down to the corner of the farm and checked where that little metal stake was all the time, just to make sure somebody hadn't moved it. I know that down in the Flint Springs community, I've read a big number of the original deeds down in there looking for stuff, and a lot of them refer to the Red Rock
yes.
sitting at the highway, the road. Well, in the last couple of years, some fellas moved that rock because it was hard to mow around, excuse me. And so I think I'm going to have to go down there and have a little talk with him and see if we can't put the Red Rock back where it was,
Yes.
because it needs to be there.
And see, and that's the principle we were talking about earlier. Property's only created once. Mm-hmm. We have a 100-acre farm and you cut out 5 acres. We only create that property once. Well, once they decide it's from the Red Rock to the oak tree, well, if they measure it wrong, that doesn't mean the line's no longer from the Red Rock to the oak tree because the measurement's not right. That original marker, and it's an admonition for all surveyors that we're told from the time we go to our first survey class is that it's our job to retrace the footsteps of the original surveyor. Even if he got his measurements wrong, we still have to retrace his original footsteps. And that's why history is so important for everything we do, because we're not recreating math, we're recreating history. And that changes the whole complexion of what our job is. And so, but yeah, this battle, and I expect this battle with Georgia and Tennessee will flare up once again the next drought comes along.
Yeah, they want that
Well,
water.
That was the last time when I think we had some state legislators took them a truckload of
Yes.
pickup truckload of water down. I don't think that went over too big, but yeah.
Okay, before we went on the air, we were talking about the baseline for Bradley County.
Yes.
Let's start at the back up and explain to our folks what the baseline was and
Okay.
why you've been looking for it.
Okay, let me kind of jump back. In the United States, we had the 13 original colonies. Well, the 13 original colonies were surveyed by a method we call the meets and bounds system, and that's in Tennessee also falls in there. So it ended up being the 13 original colonies, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia are on what we call a meets and bounds system. And that means land is described by giving the direction and the distance for each line, like north 10 degrees east, 100 feet to a stump, right? Well, in 1785, they passed the land ordinance of 1785. And what that was is it devised a way to dispose of the lands which were at that time the western part of this country. And that was the only asset we had to pay for the Revolutionary War, was to sell that land. And so they came up with a system, and Thomas Jefferson was the father of that, where we divided land in these 1 mile sections, a mile by mile. And that's sectionalized land.
640 acres.
Yeah, 640 acres. And if you fly out to the west and you look out of a plane, you can see that.
You can see it.
Grid
Square,
pattern.
square, square.
And those grids were supposed to be laid out in a true north-south, east-west direction. In Tennessee, because it became a state in, 1796, it was supposed to be part of that system. So we were laid out into districts. Well, of all the districts in the country, the Ocoee district was laid out, instead of north, south, east, and west, it was laid out south 20 degrees west, or 20 degrees off of the due north-south line. Because the Tennessee River, the way it was sitting, if they would have ran them north, south, east, and west, they would have ended up creating what we call fractional townships, or partial sections. And that's messy.
Yeah.
So they tried to prevent
But that still happened.
That still happened, right. And so from Tipton, from 1836 to about 1838, laid these sections out. And we used that system until about 1850. And then we abandoned it, went back to the meets and bounds system. But the baseline started over the course of the south side of the Hiwassee River, across from where, I guess, Main Street, Calhoun comes out. And it extended down what would be Michigan Avenue, down the west side of Michigan Avenue. And that was the basis line. And then from there, he started laying out these 1 mile sections. And land was sold by what they call aliquot parts. And that means you didn't buy land by, a meets and bounds description. You bought the southwest quarter of section
2,
16.
Township 3.
Right.
Yeah, all
And
that.
the older descriptions in Bradley County still refer to that. Of course, out west, that's still the system they use today. And we have a manual, the Bureau of Land Management manual, that describes exactly how you're supposed to operate in that system. But our system was supposed to begin that way, and then it morphed back to the meets and bounds system.
Huh. Did not know that. And I think I told our listeners before that the survey book's gone.
Yes, all the survey.
Oh,
and see,
man.
part of the original land ordinance of 1785 required that the land was surveyed before it was sold, but then all of the original plats or drawings of the properties, along with all the original notes, were to be recorded. And you can still get to all those notes across the entire United States at the Bureau of Land Management site, except the
Bradley
Ocoee
County.
District.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Ocoee District,
Yeah.
which is about a little tiny bit of Marion County, half of Hamilton, all of Bradley, almost all of Polk County. There was a little section that was added later above the river, which was kind of odd to me, and then part of Monroe County.
And what's interesting about that, now you mentioned Chattanooga. If anyone's familiar with downtown Chattanooga, where Market Street and Georgia Avenue come together, there's a restaurant there called the Pickle Barrel.
Yes.
It still sits there today.
Funny shaped building.
Do you know why it's funny shaped? That's where the Ocoee district runs into the next district. And that's actually cocked at north 20 degrees east, south 20 degrees west.
Barry is a fountain
why
of
that's-
useless information.
Useless
I
information.
love it.
That's
love
what
it.
I do.
We need him here on the show.
What's North Georgia like Murray County? I know that's where my mother's family's from, and they had militia districts.
Yes.
So was that outlined the same way, or is it?
Well, Georgia's different. Georgia was, Georgia was laid out in squares, but it was laid out in land lots. They had a land lottery, and they still had these 160-acre lots that they laid out. And it was the first time that they laid out land based on its agricultural value.
And it was a lottery.
Yes, and it was a lottery. And you pulled
Oh,
the
now wait a minute.
land-
Based on its value.
Yes, the land lots change sizes. If your land was more farmable, I guess, or more agriculturally viable, it would be a smaller piece of a land lot. Whereas if you got into the sandier, where it was harder to
Did
grow,
not know that.
The land lots would get larger. And then there's the gold lots.
Yeah.
There were gold lots around Dahlonega. There were gold lots in the Ocoee district up
Up in
around
Monroe
Yeah,
County.
Monroe County.
Coker Creek.
Yeah, and these were the 40-acre land lots because they figured they had gold on them, so they were much more valuable. And so,
Now, let me ask you about the Coker Creek gold. There never was very much gold found
No,
there.
there wasn't much
No,
found.
was it fool's gold? Or they
I
just
don't know if it was fool's gold or if it's just something. It was wishful thinking because they had found it in Georgia at Dahlonega.
They said, yeah,
it was the
we
same
got some
type of
too.
Topography.
Oh, okay,
that type of thing.
okay.
So
Very interesting.
Folks, you're listening to Old Town Cleveland here on Whoop FM 99.9, or you go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. If you want to call us, what do you do there, Morgan?
You call us here at 614-5553, or if you happen to be out of the area, 423-614-5553.
And it's time to open up the phone, so
Well,
if you'd like to call
If
us,
I can hit the button.
yeah, well, I've had
Push
trouble
'em
doing
all.
that. Push them all till something happens, that's what I'm saying. So the
What's
bomb
this?
goes
The radio
boom.
broadcast went off because Morgan was pressing buttons.
Morgan was pressing back.
So every area didn't do it the same way. I mean, is this because
No.
it was state governments or?
yeah, the states, of course, once the land passed from federal ownership to the states, and the states kind of decided how they wanted to do each one.
Still doing that today, aren't they? Whatever they want
Pretty
to do.
much,
Yeah.
whatever they want to do. But now as far as, and also as it moved across, the land ordinance of 1785 dictated that we were to lay out these sections, but there was never an official complete manual until 1850. So from 1785 to 1850, surveyor generals would be picked for different areas, and they would issue just written instructions. So you have all sorts of weird anomalies across the system. By the time they got to the West Coast, it was fairly well standardized. But until they got there, they have this strange thing in Alabama called half-mile post, which that's a technical. It doesn't exist anywhere else, and it's just because of it was just an anomaly for that state.
Wow, Barry. I wish I could
And of course, we
download
have
what's in your head and
A
my
lot
head.
of properties still section roads. You can
Yes.
see them where they go down
Yes.
straight, take a hard 90 degree, and
Right.
that's right along the property lines, right?
Yes, yeah, they ran a lot of these old roads down these old section lines.
So that one person did not have a road running through their land.
That's exactly
It
right.
ran kind of on the line, folks, and that's when we call them the S curves and stuff. Out in the country, you still have those,
Right.
and you can see lots of places where they've cut them out.
Right.
I think we're getting ready to lose one in our backyard. The city's going to put in a road from that new bypass out there over to South Lake Highway, and the very thing that they're going to do is take that sharpness out of that curve
Right.
and come across a field behind our house. And I thought, well, there goes another S curve, a section line.
And when they do that, it's interesting when they do that, they quite often do that. They reroute roads. When they reroute roads to correct intersections and so forth, a lot of times property gets orphaned, and triangular pieces of property get orphaned, and those are called gores. And they actually have a name for it. It happens so often whenever a piece of property.
I tell you, the
orphaned.
properties I worry about
Who
are the
eventually takes that property? The city, the county?
They usually have to. Yeah, sometimes they'll give it back to the owner if they find it through a title search. They will try to do something equitable with it.
Yeah, so they
It's
can
the
get it back
little-
on the tax
Tax
roll.
roll. That's right.
It's the
Tax
little
roll.
cemeteries that suffer so much from all of this
Right.
because over the years now, they're taken out of the surveys.
Mhm.
Unless I guess the people can request that they stay. I don't know. And then it becomes no one's cemetery and no one takes care of
That's
it.
right.
And,
That's right.
I have so many people that want the county to take care of they can't possibly take care of all the cemeteries.
Right.
And so it's a sad situation. We're losing cemeteries because of it.
Yes.
Well, going back to the Copper Hill, or Ducktown was the first battle over this run. 1828 was this become a full court battle, and who won and what happened?
No, actually, as far as I know, it's never went that far because it's all. I think there's been cooler heads have prevailed, and people have come along and explained that principle that I explained to you earlier. Once the line's in the ground, it's there.
It's there.
It's there.
Wrong or not,
Right,
it's there.
Right. Because the measurements in a deed aren't there to define the line. They're there to help you find the evidence on the ground of where the line was originally put.
We were kind of surprised in the last couple of years we've been involved with selling pieces of property, they don't come out and survey anymore.
No, and that's a really bad mistake. You know?
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't real comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, no, I want somebody out here putting one of those little stobs in the ground with a little orange flag on it so that my neighbor knows exactly where her line's at.
And it's a money issue. I mean, it's
Okay.
like everything else. But it's, they're trying to get that cost down, before they can sell it as much as
It's
possible.
fast.
As fast as much as possible.
Now, I like
And-
the fast part, but I wasn't real comfortable with it.
Yeah, and in this state for years they did a thing called mortgage loan surveys, and those aren't actually real boundary surveys. Just they come out and make sure your house is on your lot
Oh, yes.
and that you have a driveway, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
You
Make
know.
sure you're. Okay, we've got a caller.
Alrighty, caller, you are now live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hello, this
Hello.
is Vicky Brakefield.
Hey, Vicky, what's going on?
Oh, I don't know. Are you in Georgia or Tennessee?
Well, you're,
Well, are you in Georgia or Tennessee?
I don't know. I'm supposed to be in Tennessee, but now my father-in-law, I always said the line, of course I figured it was his way of getting a little bit more land. He'd always say it was farther south than what it is. But, Debbie, you've seen those old papers where Rachel...
Yes.
And so Rachel's son would be 100 this year. So this farm has been in this family for a long, long time.
I always assumed that the road just past your house is the Georgia-Tennessee line.
No,
Okay.
the line is right there where the Reagan Road comes out.
Yes.
Straight across.
Okay.
And so
So there's some little sliver of land then that's...
I think it was 13 acres. And see, we bought part of it because we didn't want no houses or anything next to us. So we bought all the land from here to the church.
Okay.
From my driveway to the church is all Georgia. And, but Dub always just claimed it was feet off, just
Yeah.
so many feet off from some old papers he
Well, 13 acres is a lot.
well, yeah, really.
That's
they're-
interesting.
They're
And-
talking about the miles. Georgia border is a mile north, so it would take your house in.
Oh, you mean it's north?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
north. It comes towards your house.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Yeah. See, that's why we don't move those lines.
That's why we don't move those lines.
That's
Well, that's interesting. But you have when did they move down there, Vicky? From the Smokies.
It would have been when Rachel was born in Sevier County, and then Onslow came down here and bought, which it was a whole lot more, I think maybe even 100 more acres than what's here on my part. And so that would have had to been, I don't know when Rachel was born. Bertha was born in, Dub's 100 years old. So
Yeah, it was probably after the Civil War, but not much. I don't remember now. Although I have written all that up at some point in time.
But that's how
That's
all
interesting.
of this got bought, and it was on in Georgia and Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
And see, down there where Ray Ogle's place across the road, see, part of them stayed down there at
Yeah.
one point. But then they started selling it off till all that was left was the part that was in Tennessee.
Good deal. All right. Well, thanks for calling. That's interesting.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I know that Ron's family lived in Murray County, but a corner of their house was in Polk County.
Really?
And of course,
Actually,
they
about
won't-
to ask something about that because I remember when I was littler, I always had this idea of, what if I built a house literally that's half in Tennessee
Yeah.
and half in the Georgia?
There's always moonshining and bar stories about that where
You
they,
would pay state income tax in Georgia.
yeah.
Yes.
Period.
It's
Yeah.
like you have kids. It's like your kid's like, Dad, you're pacing. Stop worrying. You keep going into Georgia and Tennessee.
Yeah, keep going into Georgia and Tennessee, but that's, I know that Ron's family was sitting on the line and it was kind of a joke in the family, where were you born? And some of them would say Georgia and some of them would say Polk County. And probably just depending on where they were born in the house. But I think they discourage people from doing such activities as that now. Can you?
Yeah.
Probably the mortgage company wouldn't go for
Yeah,
it.
they wouldn't like that kind of thing. Not to say it doesn't happen. The reason I actually originally surveyed the Tennessee, Georgia, I didn't survey the whole line, of course,
No.
just a section right there at the Copper Hill,
Yes.
was for an assault case. There was a gentleman assaulted behind a bar, and he fell really close. There's a blue line painted through Copper Hill that says Tennessee, Georgia. He fell right on the line, and they didn't know where to try the case. And so that's why they wanted to know where the line was at.
Look at Ron's face. He's trying to figure out if you're telling the truth.
Yeah, no, really, it was.
It's like that. It's
Yeah.
like that whole thing.
I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of people get hurt behind bars in Copper Hill. Don't know if you do that or not.
That reminds me of that one.
I've got a lot of stories about people not just getting hurt.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like that one story I heard before we get this caller. Like there was a crash and everybody died, and it was between the Georgia and Tennessee line. Where would you bury the survivors?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's survivors.
We don't
yeah.
bury survivors.
That's right.
But anyway, let's get this caller. Caller, you're live in on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning.
Good morning, Marvin.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm making it.
Good.
We're here. What's going on, Miss Joe?
Debbie,
Yes.
how's Ron doing?
He is doing much better, Miss Joe. I didn't kill him, taking him all the way to Oklahoma and back, and so I think he'll survive. It was a long trip for both of us.
She tried to drag me out behind the car and leave me a couple of times.
She did?
Oh, yeah.
My Lord.
We had a really good time, though.
Well, that's good. And he made the trip. And
It was a long one. Yeah, he made it.
I'm sure he saw his doctor before he left.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He's fine. He's doing much, much better.
Well, okay then. That's,
All righty. Thank you for calling, darling.
I'll talk
Bye-bye.
to you later.
Bye-bye, Miss
Bye-bye.
Joe. Miss Joe calls us every week, and she doesn't call. We get worried about her. But Ron had a little surgery a few weeks ago, and he's been on. It's been a slow comeback, but he's okay now. I think he's doing pretty well. But I was a little worried about driving him 12 hours and then dragging him all over Oklahoma.
You driving me.
No, he
And
drove.
I drove you
he
12
drove
hours.
Me. He would not let me drive. I don't think he thought he could.
I thought he was going to say. I thought he was going to say, "You driving me? No, I drove you crazy or something crazy or something like that."
Well, she drove me crazy, too, but that's something else.
We had a good time. We had a good time. We had about 200 people at the convention, and they took us to a little town called Cane Hill in Arkansas. And it was a little town like maybe Calhoun. And they had an academy left, a big 3-story old-timey academy left, and a few little storefronts and a couple of little houses. That was all that's left. Well, somebody that I guess used to live there kind of wanted to preserve things, and so they have given that little bitty historical society $4 million. They had renovated that academy that was gorgeous and very usable now, and the little country store had been turned into a museum, and there was an old metal prefab building there in town that they purchased it too, and they turned it into a really nice restroom for all the outdoor activities and stuff, and it was pretty amazing, wasn't it, Ron?
Yes.
And it was out in the middle of
$4 million helps.
where?
It really does help.
Well, and apparently they had been good stewards of that money.
Yes.
It was like our library was done recently. It was done right, and that was really a fun day to see that. And then they took us over to some battlefield. I still don't remember the name of that place.
Prairie Ridge.
Thank you. That's why I take him with me. He can remember all the names. But we went to Prairie Ridge. I believe both of those are state parks now, both of those
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, about 13,000 troops fought there.
Yeah.
No, 23,000 troops fought there. 12 Union, 11,000 Confederates.
Yeah.
Pretty much a slaughter.
That's a
They just all got out in the field and shot at each other.
I always say, Barry, we went to some of the most beautiful places in America to kill each other.
That's exactly right.
Because I just thought, I stood there, they took us to see one of the battlefields, and it was this gorgeous field full of these grazing cattle, and the sun was coming down, and the trees were turning colors, and it was just gorgeous. And then there's, describing the battle that took
Right.
place there, and I'm thinking, we lost our minds.
That's
We
exactly
lost our
right.
minds.
Let me ask you a question, since you work with TVA. If a lawsuit came and Georgia got a mile of Tennessee, how would that affect TVA?
Actually, it's interesting you should say that. When this kicked up the last time, that was actually kicked around in our company in our legal department, they actually were preparing for that because we didn't want Georgia tapping into that Tennessee River at that point in time, because it would cause, if they start using it for water source, it's going to cause, environmental problems, and,
Right.
pulling the water out and that type of thing. And we also use that water to cool nuclear plants, that type of thing. So that was a concern. That would be something that I'm sure we would look hard at.
Would it actually took in the Nickajack?
That's where they would tap. I don't think it would take in the whole thing, but it would give them
It
enough
would took in
access.
the reservoirs. I mean, they would actually been able to get water on the
Yeah.
upper riverside.
Yeah, on the riverside, right.
Okay.
That's what they're shooting for, and that they would have been able to do that, and we were very concerned about that. Yes.
So, but would they actually been able to say that Nickajack Dam is now in Georgia?
Now that I'd have to check into. I don't
See, that
know
would be
exactly.
interesting.
Right.
What would they still control? Would TVA still be able to control it?
Well, it's being a federal agency, I'm sure, because we have dams in Alabama. And,
Yeah, I didn't know
everywhere.
if we had any in Georgia though.
Yeah.
'Cause we-
No, we
Georgia,
don't.
Georgia.
No, we service Georgia. We go
Oh,
down
do you?
into Georgia. We're doing a job right now in Calhoun.
Okay.
So we're down in the northern part of the state.
Northern part,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And after that, then Georgia Power picks up.
So this isn't just a little minor lawsuit if it was to come to the
Oh no,
court.
no. As a matter of fact, it would probably end up in the Supreme Court, I would think.
Oh, yeah.
If it ever went that far, But I think, like I said, cooler heads look at it and understand that line's been there that long, and courts like status quo. They don't like upsetting everybody's apple cart. After
Right.
so many years. If that happened, we wouldn't have shopping malls, and people wouldn't build these grand buildings if they thought someone could come along, 60, 70 years later and tear them down.
Yeah, that's what you're hoping for. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So
Let's go back to the baseline in Charleston. Talk about how you tried to find that. Is it the limestone rock?
Yeah,
Let's talk about that.
in the original notes, when Tipton laid out that first baseline, it said there was a limestone rock. Well, there's a group out there, and this was actually a seminar that we had there in Charleston about the baseline and so forth. A friend of mine who's a surveyor in Chattanooga, Bart Craddy, who's very historically minded, put this whole thing on. But as a group of surveyors, we went up there and looked for that limestone rock. We've looked for it there on the bank of the river. Couldn't find it, and we've kind of come to the conclusion either it wasn't marked that well, or when TVA did back up the river, they backed it up enough that it rose and covered that limestone outcropping or rock or whatever it was. But, we have a group of surveyors. I was telling you before, we have a group of surveyors that they're called the Surveyors Historical Society. And they get together every year and go retrace an historical survey, and they actually dress in the time period that they're surveying, and we survey it with the same tools. This year we went to Henry David Thoreau's pond because Henry David Thoreau was a surveyor. I didn't get to go this year, but they went, and they've surveyed George Washington's original survey. They've surveyed
So George Washington was a surveyor.
Oh, George Washington.
As was Thomas Jefferson, right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, 3 of the 4 guys on Mount Rushmore were surveyors.
Isn't that something? Well, I know that's one of the reasons that some people were invited to come into the Cherokee Nation here when it was still the Cherokee Nation. It was the surveyors, and it's kind of like they wore a lot of different hats. Ron's family member, the Eppersons, were down at where Green Shadow Lake is now.
Right.
And so he was the justice of the peace there,
Right.
which meant he made everybody behave. And he was the surveyor, and he was, kind of like he wore all the hats in that one community while this area was being developed, and that's what happened in every community.
Right.
And I don't know, I believe it was bigger than 1 square mile, probably what he was in charge of. He owned 1 square mile,
Right.
but then Ron's grandfather was born in 1888, and he was telling the story when he was in his 80s that when his grandfather came to this area, the Cherokees were still here.
Right.
And they liked to borrow his gun to hunt with. And they would just kind of knock on the door, and they would just hand them the gun, and they'd tell them how many days it would be before they'd bring it back. And he said they never brought it back on time. But when they did bring it back, they just open the door without knocking, put the gun back up on the rack, and just turn and walk out. And don't you love those old stories like
Exactly
that that
right.
have been preserved?
And they did that without a background check.
Yeah, but without a background
Yeah,
check.
exactly.
No thumbprints involved.
this limestone rock in Charleston, is this north, south? Where is it? More up north of the Bow Waters or south of Bow Waters?
It comes straight up Dry Valley Road.
Right.
Would be in line with Dry Valley Road.
Right.
Okay.
Right. There's actually, I can't remember, and I've actually surveyed. There's a house that sits right there. I can't think of who owns it now. For some odd reason, I used to know.
In Charleston.
Yeah, and it sits around the bank of the river and right behind it. But if you go to Calhoun, where the old Main Street Calhoun comes
Yes.
down, if you extend it straight across the river, that's where the limestone rock was at on the south side of the
I don't
river.
remember that guy's name either, but he's
say
very
Bob.
cooperative. He's very
Yeah,
cooperative.
yes,
I know that they're looking at, and TVA has been wonderful to the folks up in Charleston. There eventually will be a walk from the park by the Cypress Gardens.
Right.
Maybe even through it. I don't remember now, but comes up through there and it'll go up, and that fella has given permission. We only had to deal with 2 private landowners to bring that walkway all the way up to the river, which is amazing.
Right.
Which is amazing. And that's going to be done here pretty soon, I think.
Really?
Yeah. They're going to renovate the museum, and then the walkway will start, and it'll start right there at where Charleston Treasures is located in the Hiwassee Heritage Center, right across from the school. And it'll go to the park first, and then it'll go up by the springs and to the river, and so it'll be all the way down. And we were up there a couple of weeks ago eating with our grandbabies, and they have fixed up the boat ramp really nice. It was clean, new picnic tables, new signage there to explain
Right.
where you're at. So there's a lot of history saving going on in Charleston and
Yes.
Calhoun. There's some people working really hard on
Well,
that.
there's a lot of history up there to say.
And I'll use the word we, but I'm just the big cheerleader. I'll just,
Right.
I'm just like, oh, yay.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, we had several people from the Charleston area go to our meeting out in Oklahoma.
Real quick, for all of our football fans that listen in, Bradley beat William Blunt 51-21, something last night.
7 something.
And then
Sound like a basketball.
Ooltewah Cleveland beat Ooltewah 42-7, which was thought to be a little closer. And I have not heard how Walker Valley and McMinn County did, if there's any listeners out there. And also Polk County and
I'll look it up real quick.
Polk and I've got who they played now. Meigs County, I think, which you would think Meigs County may have won that one, being as good as they are this year. So if anybody hears those scores, we got Barry Savage here. We're talking about surveying, particularly how the Georgia line, well, Georgia claims it's a mile more this way. So if you live down on the border, someday they may just try to get you to be a Georgia resident.
Well, I think it's nice that they don't change it, though.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it's wrong, it would just mess up a lot of.
Well, I don't
mess up
think
a lot
they're
of
being
stuff.
nice about it. They just can't figure out how to get it done.
Right.
I mean, because
But I am
the
curious
water out
about-
of the Nickajack Lake is probably the most important thing out there right now, isn't it?
Right. Oh, yeah.
I found the results.
Okay,
for
go
you.
ahead.
It's,
Go ahead, sports reporter.
I was one time at Bradley, and that was a heck of a time. But anyway, it says I'm getting this from Max Preps. So, Walker Valley stats have been entered for the loss versus McMinn County on October 20th, 2017, and it's I think the score. I'm just reading the thing below. It
Yeah.
says 49-31. If I am wrong, football fans,
That's
please don't.
So Walker Valley lost. Is that
Yeah,
what
Matt
you're
Mim was
saying?
leading, yes.
Yeah. It was their homecoming too.
You have a caller. Alrighty, caller, you were live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, good morning. This is Edward Webb.
Morning.
Hey,
Ed.
Ed Webb. What can we do for you this morning?
Oh, this is wonderful. This is the most interesting program that you've had on in a while, and I'm learning so much from what he's talking about on surveying.
Yes.
And one question, I don't know whether I should ask it or not.
Go ahead.
I've always wondered that there was a dispute up in Charleston, close to the river, between a gentleman and the TVA. That the gentleman was supposed to have had a deed to some property, and TVA said they owned it, and I never did know whether that was settled or not, and I don't know whether you can talk about that. But
It has been sent to the next level of court.
Right.
It lost at one level, and now they're going up. They're going to go through several levels of court.
okay.
All righty.
This is a great program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
And, you know, after 9 years, we have a hard time finding new folks to come on now. So
Right.
excited. Someone, Mantooth, maybe? Someone that works with you's mom sent me a note and says, hey, you got to get this
Yes.
guy on the show.
Yeah,
So,
I work with Chris.
Chris.
Yeah, Chris Mantooth. He's a valuable part of our team.
That's good.
He's the little engine that could when it comes to getting our transmission lines
okay.
built in this in this state.
That's good. I think, you know, I know that Mrs. Campbell that lived down in the Black Fox Valley had called me. I mean, she was 90 when she passed, and she would call and ask me to come by. And one question she'd always have, she said that she had looked and looked and looked and had never found that big limestone rock in Charleston.
Right.
And that makes sense that if it was right down on the edge of the water, it's just under the water now.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
they moved it because it was a big rock that was going to be in the water.
Exactly right. And you know, if you look at the like James K. Mack's original notes, the way they marked lines back then, they used natural markers. You know, that's one of the problems we have with the Georgia state line is he marks trees and that kind of thing. Well, that was 200 years ago. You know,
Right.
the final trees. You know, to recreate the line, we had to go back and find points where he crossed rivers at specific points and mountaintops and that type thing. And we mentioned before, you know, we used the Delilah Van's grave there in Old Fort across from Busted Rock Road. He actually calls for that in his notes.
I
And
love
we
it.
use that.
Well,
Let's get this call.
real quick. Caller, you're now live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning.
Hello, go ahead.
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just thinking when I was a kid, my father, who taught history at Bradley, Clarence Donahue, I was a little bitty kid, but we were down at Red Clay, I guess before it was a state park, and he was kind of telling me a lot of the stories as you're kind of talking about, and he was talking about James Donahue. And, you know, he was believed to be the first resident down in Blue Springs besides the Cherokees that was there, and he was assistant U.S. Federal Marshal, I think probably 14 years before Bradley County was a county. And I found some historical records that said that at the time he... in this area, there was only one other, there was the people at the Cherokee Agency, and his closest other neighbor was Sumac, Georgia.
You couldn't even see their front porch light on from there. Right.
I'm sorry.
I said you couldn't see their front porch light that far away. That's pretty far away.
Yeah, and it named a Eisenhower with an I man that lived up in Charleston, and then it said in the I got it from the Historical Society, and it said that that besides him and the people working for the agency, that was all that was in the area.
I would think that was all the white people in the area. There were lots of Cherokees here. Yeah.
Yes,
But
yeah.
yeah. And they knew who they were because they had to basically fill out paperwork to get permission to come into the area. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And James had petitioned the Andrew Jackson, which he knew to. I found that also in the library archives to kind of stop the Indian removal.
Yes.
And but I was thinking back when we were down there, it was dark, and my father, he loved to discuss history and the Chatta Valley and the ridges. And when you were talking about the lines and everything, and I remember him saying at one time that his great grandfather and all of them who grew up down in there told him that I think the Georgia line may, at that time, it kind of jockeyed back and forth, but I think during his day and time, I think it was, it was considered to be even a little bit probably further south than Cohutta.
I don't know that. I think it probably would be going in the other direction.
And now,
You're talking, but you're talking, 14 years or so.
That's right. That's right.
County was a county, but,
That's
they
right.
talk about that.
That's right.
And I found some stuff in my grandmother's archives, and I still got to look where they kept some diary notes and other things, and of course I read the passages on Bradley County Divided, where James
Yes.
got in trouble for trying to keep the sympathizers from voting for the northern.
Yeah, that's right.
For the
What
north.
you might want to do, if you've got family notes, you might want to take those to our archives and let Miss Steele, copy those for the archives, because those are very valuable resources that aren't printed anywhere for everybody to see. And she would just love to
Like I say, I haven't
scan
seen
those.
them in years.
Well, it's time to dig them, as Ron says. It's time to dig them out from under the bed. And
Well, they're in storage.
Oh.
But yeah, they're in boxes, but I'll do my best.
okay, that is so interesting. Thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, he mentioned something interesting.
I
there.
love our callers.
Oh, yeah. Well, he mentioned something interesting there. He said, the line jogs back and forth. We mentioned earlier that they used this sextant, and they could only use it at noon to figure out where their latitude was at. Well, if they ran into a day that was cloudy, well, they kept moving along with a compass. And so that's why you get these jogs in the line, because then the next sunny day, they would figure out where they're at, and they're like, oh, look, we're too far north, or we're too far south. Then they would correct up. And that's why you get these crazy jogs in some of these state lines.
Yes, and my mom, when her family came from Monroe County, they lived where Red Clay State Park is now, and the great whatever aunt owned that big. I call it the Goat Hill because the people used to there at the at that house that was right there at the park. They always had goats, so we always called it the Goat Hill, but they lived up there on the Goat Hill. So that was my mom's stomping grounds when she grew up. And she said that there was a building that looked like a council house, like the council house at Red Clay now, over on the Georgia side when she was a child. And the people around there called it the council house. Of course, there are notations where the soldiers were less than a half a mile away watching the activities across the border. So that could have been from that time frame. But, I found old sketches of it and everything, so apparently it existed. History is interesting, isn't it?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, that's I think it was Winston Churchill once said, the further back you look, the further forward you can see.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's an important concept. What we
Well, and I think that some of this whitewashing of our history that's trying to go on now, we got to leave everything in place so the whole story gets told.
That's exactly right.
And there's ugly parts of it.
That's right.
I'm in up to my eyeballs in the Trail of Tears, and people go, "Oh, that's so sad." And I said, "But it's a success story too,
Right.
Because by George, the Cherokees survived it, and the
Right.
Creeks survived it, and the Seminoles, and the
Choctaws.
Choctaws, and the Chickasaws, they all survived it. And it may not been, they probably would have rather been here, but we had a historian from the Cherokees told us if we had stayed, we would have lost our culture. And what a valuable asset
Right.
that is. And I'm thinking what a positive, wonderful outlook that is.
And what's amazing, you mentioned the Chickasaws, and I don't want to get off on
No,
on
we can talk about anything. We just go everywhere.
I don't want to get up on a tangent here, but I surveyed a section of the Tennessee-Mississippi state line for a dispute between two power companies. And in doing that research, I read some old diaries from a man by the name of Brown that laid it out in 1820, 30, something like that. Anyway, when they laid out the first Tennessee-Mississippi state line, when they got to Memphis, they were a mile too far north. And that happened 2 or 3 times. When they got to Chickasaw Bluffs, in his diary, he said he mentioned to the Indians that we're trying to run. However, I don't know if he had a translator, if everybody spoke English.
They use like translators.
But it said, we're trying to run the 35th degree of latitude for the state line. And the Indians said, you're too far north. You need to be south a mile. I've never figured out how the Indians knew that. Because, I know that they were brilliant and that, the culture they built.
Well, let me tell you something you don't know. It show you some of the level of education among the Cherokee. First of all, they invented their own language.
Right.
That's a pretty good deal. But down here in Flint Springs at the Red Clay Mission, prior to the removal, they had been educating the young children of all ages. But at the very end, they had young women down there training them to be educators when they got to the Indian Territory. And they were teaching them astronomy, advanced mathematics. Everything that listed weren't basic skills. They were all advanced education. And a lot of them had gone to Maryville College prior to that. And so we just don't think about that
no.
because that's not portrayed as much as it should be.
Right.
But I know for the last few months before the removal, there were hundreds of people gathering down in that area, waiting for the removal around John Ross's house. And so there were some diaries and things written. But I just thought that was really interesting that they were doing that really upper level of education at that point in time.
Yeah.
Well, folks, it's about time for our mid-morning break. Every week we, right after we play a few words from our sponsors.
After we pay a few words from our sponsors?
Play a few words. They're paying, but after we play a few words from our sponsors, we play a song called Gone Home. We dedicate that to all the people in our community that lost a loved one this week or around our community. Longtime broadcaster in the area, Don Welch, passed away this week.
Grandpappy.
Right. Good friend of mine, Keith Arbwine, from works at Cleveland Utilities. His father passed away in McMinn County this week. Had been fighting some cancer. We're sorry to hear that for Keith. If you have any members of your family, we dedicate this to you too. We'll be back here in a few minutes on Old Town Cleveland.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall.
And you're listening to WOOPLP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Is it time for a new ride? At Buy Here, Pay Here USA, for just $500 today, you can drive it away. Come by any of our 4 locations in Chattanooga, Cleveland, Dayton, and Dalton, Georgia, and find your new ride. For just $500 down, you can drive it away today. Remember, all our vehicles have passed a 200-point inspection and come with a 6-month, 6,000-mile warranty. And you get a free Carfax report and appraisal on your vehicle. Visit us at BuyHerePayHereUSA.com. Offer subject to credit approval. See store for details. We are Buy Here, Pay Here USA.
This is Teresa Gilbert from the Village Bake Shop in Cleveland, Tennessee. Do you have a birthday, wedding, or anniversary coming up and want that perfect cake? Need some donuts to sweeten up your coworkers? Want to surprise your sweet thing with a bag of cookies? Then come on over to the Village Bake Shop. Family operated since 1961. The Village Bake Shop is your first and last stop for fresh baked goods that will feed your sweet tooth. The Village Bake Shop located at the Village Green Town Center. The phone number here is 423-476-5179. See you soon.
Matthews Pool and Spa Company, located in Cleveland, Bradley County for over 45 years. You know them. They're your new swimming pool construction and supply company in Cleveland, Tennessee, now with 4 generations of Matthews to serve you. Matthews Pool and Spa Company, for over 45 years, your swimming pool construction and supply company, spa or hot tub installation and maintenance. Get all of your supplies for your pool or spa right now. That's the new location in the old Quinn Electric Company building behind KFC at 2724 Keith Street in Cleveland. Call Matthews now, 476-4521. You better get your order in now for your new pool construction for this spring and summer. 476-4521. Matthews Pool and Spa Company. Gonna jump in. Woo!
Say, gone, they have gone home, gone, they have gone home. They've joined the heavenly fold. They're walking the streets of pure gold. They left one by one as the work here was done. Gone home, they have gone home, gone, they have gone home. disappeared gone. They left one by one as their work here was done. Gone home. They have gone home. Gone home. Where the old town goes. They moved it on north of here, near a shopping mall. Where'd the old town go? Did my hometown get old, or just me? Did all my friends get old, or just me? Are they all gonna have to be told, or just me?
Oh, he was asking me to bring it in. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought he was saying turn on the mic.
Don't point at me. I pointed at you.
They pointed
Welcome
at
to
each
Old
other.
Town Cleveland, folks, where we are very directionless at the moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're listening to Old Town Cleveland here on Whoop FM 99.9 FM, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. And I'm going to do this next part in my British accent because I'm pretty sure Ron would ask me to
Yes,
do
he
it.
would.
Go
Anyway,
ahead.
you can call us here at 614-5553, or if you happen to be out of the area, 423-614-5553.
And I'll do mine in my southeast Tennessee because it's the only one I've got. Y'all, we got Barry Savage here. He's an expert on mapping and architect. Not architect. What is it? What's the word? Huh?
Land surveying.
Land surveying. Yes, that's it. Works for TVA and also I think he's taught some classes at Chattanooga State. At Cleveland State.
Chattanooga State too. Yeah,
Yeah.
we teach a class at surveying classes at Cleveland State every fall and spring.
And we have been talking about today about how Georgia wants 1 mile of Tennessee from Ducktown all the way over to Nickajack. Now, they're not actively after us right now.
Well,
No.
during that drought, they were.
Yeah.
They were
and-
mentioning
and,
it.
And there's always somebody out there ticked off about it. I mean, anytime you think somebody's got your land, you're going to get, upset.
Well, but now, I think if you said is that starting, land from 1828, that's where they drew the line.
Right.
And there's nothing changed since that line.
No, it's still, of course they didn't mark it that well. It's kind of tough to find, but still it's where it's always been since 1818 when they did it, and 1828 when they found their mistake.
So now, if you live in Bradley County and you live down near the Georgia line, someday if some weird court case come along, you could be in Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and also Georgia has to keep in mind it was a Georgia mathematician that figured this out from the University of Georgia. I got to wonder, but a UT grad made the same mistake.
As long as you're not on the football team.
That's exactly right. Let's not talk football this year.
No, that's
a painful subject.
I think there's going to be an upset today.
Yeah.
Really, there are going to be a lot of upset fans.
There'll be lots-
Yeah, not upsetting the score.
I really like for them to win, but it doesn't look hopeful.
Yeah.
Where did you go to school, Barry?
I went to the University of Tennessee at Martin, way out in the west near Reelfoot Lake.
Yeah, you're on the other
Well, that's
side.
an interesting place, isn't it?
Yes,
No
yes.
lake was there until we had an earthquake.
Yes, and another interesting survey factoid and from this area is that Andrew Ellicott was considered what we call the nation's surveyor. He laid out Washington D.C. He laid out the line between the Spanish land grants and the United States. Well, when he laid out the corner in what we call the Ellicott Wilderness area over between North Carolina and Georgia, you can still hike back in 6 miles and see where he etched on the side of the rock. Well, when he was etching on that rock in 1811 is when we had the earthquake that created Reelfoot Lake, and that was 500 miles away. And he records in his diary that all of his instruments fell over in his tent, and that his papers flew everywhere. And then when he got out, of course, the woods, he realized that we'd had the earthquake 500 miles away. That's how devastating that earthquake was.
Oh, man. We talk all the time about how interesting things like that happen.
Is there any other big survey pupas in the state of Tennessee right now?
And right now, I mean, now ongoing.
I'm not talking about just individuals. I'm talking about state government, city governments.
Yes. Well, right now, Tennessee has been in. Its lines were staked incorrectly based on the math from the get-go. The Tennessee-Georgia line was, the Tennessee-Mississippi line was, and the entire line.
Too much Tennessee whiskey.
That's exactly right. And the entire line between us and Kentucky was staked incorrectly. And there's an excellent book on that called 4 Steps West that you can get from the Kentucky Association of Professional Surveyors that has all the original survey notes in it and that type of thing. But every time there was a mistake like that, Tennessee came out on the good end of the deal. We got land every time.
So it looks a lot of time like in Tennessee that other states like Colorado, it's pretty square.
Yes.
We don't have a lot of straight lines. We got uphill lines, and coming down the east side, it's just I guess that's the mountains over there that we follow that.
Top of the old mountains. And that's why the southern line of Tennessee was to be the 35th degree of latitude, and the northern line was to be 36 degrees 30 minutes. The reason those lines were defined that way is there was no natural feature. Whereas on the east and the west, we have the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains.
Right.
So, but as you got further west and they started running these guide meridians like we talked about earlier, then they would use those lines, which were run on the ground, to define their state lines, because they didn't have as many obstacles as we did. We talked about how they turned the Ocoee section 20 degrees because of the river. We had all those obstacles in the east that they didn't have out in the west.
Yeah.
That made it.
Yeah, I always figured that had something
Why
to do
didn't
with
they just use their GPS on their phone?
I wish they would.
What about state size? Did we try to get the states all the same square mileage? We didn't do.
No.
Whoever invented Tennessee gave us a geographical challenge.
Yes.
Because it takes me forever to get to Memphis.
Going east to west is really.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I know. I spoke in Memphis in May, and it's like you're never going to get here. It's just forever.
It is, and we found that out when we left mid-Oklahoma and came all the way across Arkansas, and then all the way across Tennessee, and get down in Georgia at some point in time. I was thinking, good Lord.
Well, it actually took us longer to get from Memphis to Cleveland than it did from Oklahoma through Arkansas.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Probably about an hour.
Mm-hmm. It's I call it geographically challenging when as Tennessee Trail of Tears president, and I'm supposed to take care of those members over in the Memphis area.
Right.
I don't even know what they look like.
But going north to Lexington doesn't take you long.
No.
That's good. That's a good thing. Don't forget some events coming up, Deb.
Yes, the fish truck should be down at the Bradley Farmers Co-op right now. If you need to go by and pick up some fish for your pond, go down and see them.
You can get some crappie or crappie, whatever you call them. Catfish.
Yeah, they have it all right there for you, and they have bags to carry it home in and all that stuff, and the fish, until they run out, they're there. Okay, and then we have the Apple Festival going on this weekend. Our good buddy Stan Beaver will be playing tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Rockabilly Hall of Fame.
Rockabilly Hall of Fame. And I'll be having a book signing tomorrow at the old library at 2 o'clock. If you want to just come by and hear, I'm going to do about a 20 or 30-minute presentation on some of the Cherokee sites here in Bradley County where homesteads were. And then we'll just visit and sign books. You don't have to buy a book to come. Just they're going to be there because I know a lot of people have been wanting them. They are a reference book. And
but Deb said it in a great reading, but it really is when you read.
Well, it's not like
some of the people's name in there are just so interesting. Some of them are almost obscene.
Not so much in my book but as I was going through all the records for all the Cherokees that lived in Georgia and stuff, some of them had some pretty interesting names. But we were we were looking at the names the other night, and there was pigeon in the water and pigeon out of the water.
They were neighbors.
They were neighbors.
One lived closer to the water than the other, but she has people who had valuations of their property. They got $1 from the government.
Right.
And some people got $26,000. Of course, they were a little bit more of the wealthier there, but we're not sure any of them got a dime because basically they hand them a voucher that says, when you get to Oklahoma, trust us. This is that much money.
The
But then they
agent
took
out there will give you your money.
They took out the
We're
money.
the
that-
government. We're here to fix
They said, "Oh, by the way, while you came out here, we fed you, and we had to feed your horses, and we had to do that."
That was the first-
And we'll offer you 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, the first question people asked in the presentation was, did they get paid? And I had to say, that's the next book. I don't know.
And I think it's also interesting if you know what creek you live by. You know, if you say, "What about Keith and 25th Street?" There was no Keith and 25th in 1836. So maybe there was some stakes out there. I don't know, but not even then. It basically is everything was based on you live near creeks. You live near this creek or confluence of a creek.
Now, there were a few towns, Barry, Toccoa Town.
Right.
That was down by the Chickamauga Dam. I have one of the early pictures from TVA that shows the dam being built, but you can see the farmland over there where we think that Toccoa Town was, where the Chickamauga Creek ran into the river. And Buzzard Town is the one I never found.
Right.
Buzzard Town, from looking at the survey, from looking at my property evaluations that I typed up, I think it was right on the Polk County, Bradley County line on the Hiwassee River, but I don't know, can't get in my car and go there.
Right.
I don't know exactly where that would be. But Buzzard Town's the one that I asked everybody in overalls, do you know where Buzzard Town? And all of them told me where Buzzard Roost was in Ducktown. And I'd say, well, thank you, that's not the same thing.
And TVA has changed the landscape somewhat. Take Hiwassee Island, what called Hiwassee Island at one time been called Jolly Island when Sam Houston was 700 and something acres. It is only 360 acres above the water now. So,
but thankfully, the big mounds above the
yeah.
water.
So, but there's still a lot of information.
But don't go there.
It is against the law to go in there and pick things up, folks.
Even if you see it on the ground,
We've
you
talked
can't
a lot with the TVA legal departments and the.
They get
I
really
guess I
upset.
don't know what is it? Law enforcement's about.
The archaeologists.
They do have. They have cameras.
Yes, they do.
They have cameras.
And I think that.
And you can go to jail if you're caught digging on that island or
Or just
a
picking
lot of
things
other
up.
islands.
Just don't pick it up.
And on the even on the riverbank, you know, there are lots of places. So, and there is federal laws about digging up Indian artifacts
Digging up
on
and
top
selling,
of
yeah.
Indian
Right.
on top of that. So don't
I
go
think,
out and do that.
Varnell Farm up in the bend of the river in Charleston lost 13 acres.
Right.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a movement on to get some remains that were taken out of the ground and taken to the McClung Library in Knoxville during that time. I think they were afraid they were going to be underwater, and then that didn't happen to be the case. But I think there's some move to let they were probably Creek or Uchis instead of Cherokees, but I think the Cherokees may bring them back and in term, but I don't know where that stands right now. I know that it's been checked into. Need to bring them back and put them back where we found them.
You know, TVA is very sensitive to archaeological type.
Yes, they
type
are.
things. Every time we put in a transmission line or we build anything like that, we always have archaeologists go out and walk the site and look for any type of Indian remains.
I'm kind of, and it's not TVA, there's some folks putting in some cell towers right next to some of the trail over in Middle Tennessee. And we're having to have some really heavy-duty discussions about you need to make sure your folks understand they can't drive on our trail.
Well, the National Forest Service sort of, you would think would have been real keen to this, but they just took their bulldozers and sort of bulldozed down a whole
This is a-
section of the original roadway up in Unicoi. And they are...
paying the price.
The federal government's spending a lot of money now to get that all
They're going to bring young people back. They're going to bring young people from 4 or 5 different tribes in with hand tools that are going to restore the trail. That does two things. It gets the trail restored, and it makes those kids feel like it belongs
And
to
then the
them.
Unicoi Turnpike is going to basically be from North Carolina all the way probably
to the edge of the forest, yeah.
Forest, and then we're hoping to get it all the way down to Fort Cass in Charleston.
The U.S. government's going to mark the trail on the turnpike.
Okay.
As we're so sorry. We messed everything up, and we'll make it the best we can. Then Overhill, Tennessee's going to pick up at the edge of the forest and bring it all the way to Calhoun. So we'll have one trail marked all the way through North Carolina then, which is a big deal. We're getting 92 signs in Franklin County coming in. That's really exciting. Let me ask you about this. We've had a fellow on here a couple of times that's talked about marker trees. When you're surveying, do you see those bent trees?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There was a book written in 1912 by a man named, it's called Boundaries and Landmarks by A.C. Mulford. And he goes into this quite a bit. You'll go through the woods sometimes and you'll see a tree that's laying almost horizontal. And if for some odd reason it's grown out of the ground 3 or 4 feet, and then it'll go almost perfectly horizontal, and then it'll
goes
take
back up.
Yes.
A lot of times what that means is the surveyors come through and mark the line back 80, 100 years ago, and what they would do is they would cut those trees, but they wouldn't cut through the core of them, and they would bend them down in the direction the line would go, and then the tree would regrow back. So when you see that horizontal arm on that tree, a lot of times it's pointing in the what direction of an old line.
It points in the direction of a trail,
Right.
water, and property lines. My sister that called in earlier about her driveway being Georgia, I took her to, or she came to the presentation that these folks from Georgia did, and they put it up on the screen, and she was like, so surprised because they always called it the horse tree because the kids could ride it like a horse. But there's one right there, and it has to be on the Georgia
They cut one down on Harrison Pike about 6 or 7 years ago.
Really?
It was just a perfect marker tree.
Oh, yeah.
The trees
And
will
it's
be.
pointing right down the road. I mean, I went, oh, look at that marker tree, and we came by, and then its elbow was gone.
They usually would just type wood that had been a little bit more flexible, and now the trees would probably have to be, from the arrow, the Indians would probably have to be 20, 22 inches wide.
They do not grow as big because they have been messed with.
Right.
Right.
But they are a nail, and basically it comes out, goes over to your left or right, and then it's allowed to go straight back up.
Straight back up, yeah.
And so the arm a lot of times will maybe 3 foot off the ground, but a lot of times it stays right on the ground.
Yes. And, and the markers they use were dependent on the area. You get into Florida and you get in what they call the lighter wood post. And what that was a heart of pine. And the surveyors would take, and they would take a pine tree and they would chisel, or they would, chisel it down to the very core, the sappy core, and they would bury it in that moist ground in Florida. And I've had friends that survey in Florida that have found those things from 1830 and 40 still in the ground today because they just never rot.
Back, I remember as a younger boy, I used to seeing survey marks, and it was just almost like a metal plate down in the ground, like there was a little cup lid there.
Yeah.
Did they still use that type of stuff?
Yeah, they use, we drive markers in the ground and put these brass caps on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in smaller towns, those brass caps will disappear. You know what that means, don't you? Somebody's got a new belt buckle. So because people love those brass caps, but we still do that today.
So, we got a real shallow lawnmower that just ripped them all off.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
We had some fellas on the show early, 7 or 8 years ago, that talked about being Boy Scouts, and they walked the Indian Trail that came through here. Are you familiar with where that trail may have been? The Warriors Path. Yeah.
Now, actually, if of course I know they can't say this on the radio, but on
you can hold it up to the screen there.
Here, let me hold it. Y'all won't see it. There's that map that you sent me earlier. That didn't it have the Warriors Path on it?
Yes.
And the old Federal Road that comes down through there. A lot of people don't know that road is Lewis and Clark. Meriwether Lewis used to travel that road with his family when he was a young boy when they had a farm here in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis and Clark family.
Jackson came through and said, "We're here to help you,"
right.
and built the Federal Road through, and that brought the troops in that got the Cherokees out.
That's right.
That's all right. We're with the government. We're here to help you.
That's right.
Are you familiar with the boatyard at McNair's?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
I am. Yeah.
Isn't it?
The Portage, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because I'll talk about it, and people look at me like, she's just making this stuff up.
There was a portage there that he ran. It was very successful. And when I ran
extremely successful.
And when I ran the Tennessee Georgia state line, that was my first clue to where the line was at, because in K-Mac's original notes, when he crossed the old Federal Road, he said, I left McNair's 1.25 miles to the north. And that was the portage at the time. And he was married to Delilah Vann of the Cherokee Nation. And because he was an 1812 war hero, she was protected. And then when he died, they took her on the Trail of Tears. And she died soon thereafter.
In Charleston, and they brought her back home and interred her.
And if you go out to right across from Busted Rock Road on 411, you can see that stone wall that still sits out in the middle of that field.
Yes.
Well, McNair and Delilah are buried there. And her and I don't remember what it says, but her children have a scathing
basically,
of the men that they see that killed her mother on the Trail of Tears.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But for those of listening that may not know what we're talking about, up Hildebrand, up on the old Federal Road in Polk County, lived on the Ocoee River. And the boats would come down from up north I mean, we're talking way up north.
Right.
Big things of cargo would come down and stop there, and they would load it off onto wagons and take it 12 miles to McNair's, load it back on the wagon, and then it'd go south on the river.
Right.
And they got rich.
Yeah, I think they maybe had a hotel there or something, or a place where people
They
could
probably
stay.
had some kind of tavern, they were calling it at that time, or a stand.
Right.
Pettit had a stand that was up in Old Fort that was really big. But it was just really interesting what all they did on there. But the Cherokees actually talked about, before so much of the removal talk came on, about digging a canal between Conasauga River and the Ocoee. Can you imagine if we had a canal built there?
Right.
But even in those days and times, they said it was too expensive. They could move a lot of whiskey through there. There were U.S. government distilleries here.
We still moved a lot of whiskey through there.
Yeah, but I just think that I just would love to see more written about the Portage, because it's a big history that people really don't know very much about.
You know, Busted Rock had been a good place to keep whiskey underneath
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
I never swam in that hole. You ever swim through the Busted Rock hole through there?
No,
I haven't either. My family did, but I never did that.
Up at the Indian boundary, up in Monroe County, one of the descriptions of the piece of property there says that one of the markers of that boundary was a tree, and on one side of the tree was carved U.S., and on the other side was CN for Cherokee Nation. And I thought, oh, man, I thought really hard about reenacting that somehow and putting that on the cover of my book, because I thought that was so profound. And that's why that area, the recreation area up there, is called the Indian Boundary. When you got right there, you knew not to cross over into the Indian Boundary. And people called it the Indian Boundary, and then thankfully the state named their little recreation area.
Give me an education on fractional township. What does that actually mean in good old layman terms?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, when they invented when they came up with the public land system we talked about earlier, where they do the sections and 1 mile sections.
Yes.
The rule was that they wanted to make as many complete 1 mile sections as they could. Well, when they ran into a body of water or maybe a cliff out west or something, anything they couldn't farm, they weren't supposed to survey. So they created what was called a fractional township. And what that was just like a partial township, basically, where they couldn't get the complete 1 mile square out of it. So they had methodologies where they would actually terminate the lines at rivers and at that type of thing. And those were just called fractional townships because, you know, a lot of people had the money, they could buy an entire section. But if you couldn't buy the entire section, then you buy like a quarter section or something. But then you had to know if you were in a fractional section because you weren't getting that complete acreage.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
And there's some here that they'll say that it's 160 acres, but it wasn't.
Right.
It was close, but it wasn't. Right. And then there's some real funky ones down next to the Georgia line that I look at on that map and think, there's something funky about that.
So you may actually have some deeds, particularly up, what's the area that Laura's been working on? Hiwassee area up there. That you'll see those fractional townships are still on your deeds.
Yes, that means that we could find that address and take you to that exact piece of property. And she's done that for about 50 pieces of property so far.
Okay.
She's got, and I'm
what
thinking
about
there's probably something you can help her
North
with.
Georgia, the militia districts. What was the big difference there?
Well, once again, you know, Georgia did their land in land lots.
Yes.
And a lot of these militia districts were set up to give people from the Revolutionary War their property after, because, you know, they were awarded property quite often. There was around Nashville, when we first set up the survey districts here, like the Ocoee and the Hiwassee, the first district was called the militia district around Nashville, and it was set aside for the Revolutionary War vets, for them to get their portion, get their portion of land. And then, like in every township, section 16, even in the Ocoee district, section 16 was always reserved for schools.
Yeah, that's what I just wrote down.
Section 16.
And there was usually a meal section, too.
Yes.
And we have lost all those meals.
Yeah. Aren't they a lot of time called College Hill? The 16th district, like here in Cleveland?
College Hill, yeah.
College Hill.
There was a whole area on the Ocoee district, too, that ran like where Key Street is now, that was called College Land, but then it was never developed.
Right.
Yeah, you remember that?
And you know, I think I sent you, there's a map out there, and what I'd like to do is take this map and kind of overlay it onto some modern maps that O.M. Poe did. O.M. Poe was a colonel in the the Civil War, and he remapped the entire Ocoee district. And we can still have that map. And I would like to take that map and see if I could find me those old points we could still find out there.
Right.
Oh, that would be great. Now, let me ask this question. I have 500 property evaluations for that whole Ocoee district,
Right.
which is multiple counties.
Yeah.
How did they? How do you think they decided where they were going to let the Cherokees live? And then were they already letting other people live? White people come in and live, because that's not very many people for that much land.
Right. But we talked about earlier. Some of the oldest census work from the Chattahoochee Valley, Valley. If I'm saying that correctly, it talked about how the Cherokees were living right with the white settlers side by side, all up and down through that valley. So I'm sure that they lived together down through there. At least that's what the records seem to show.
Yeah, and I know that the Merle family left up there and went to Indian Territory. And that was Lewis Ross's daughter.
Right, okay.
And the Merle house is the only house plantation that was not burned in that community of Park Hill. And so it's still there and people can go through it. And I keep looking at it thinking their house in Tennessee had to look just like that in the Chattanooga.
Wasn't most of the white people living in the nation, though, married to a Cherokee?
No, not all of them, but some of them were. And once you decided that you were going to take that Cherokee land on behalf of your wife, then you became Cherokee too. And we found out how interesting that was, because some of these people got out west and got in trouble, and they were being tried. The white men were being tried in the Cherokee courts.
Huh.
Because they had declared themselves Cherokee.
Right.
And people talk about the 1835 treaty, that those illegal chiefs, well, the reason the illegal people were doing it is because everybody that had claimed land had to promise to be faithful to the United States government, and the United States government couldn't deal with them then over the land. They had to deal with people that still said they were Cherokees.
Right.
So they went out and found those 35 people that were kind of little sub-chiefs and things.
Folks, you're listening to Old Town Cleveland here on Whoop FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. You can call us at
614-5553, or if you happen to be out of the area, 423-614-5553.
I thought you was going to do the Martian guy.
Oh, dear, I forgot to do that, didn't I?
We love it.
Well,
let me ask you this.
And one other thing.
Board.
Happy birthday, belated by one day, Morgan.
It's 19. And I promise not to sing happy
I've
birthday.
got underwear older than that. I don't got it on now or nothing right now, but I do have it. I shine my shoes
Now,
with
let
it.
me tell you what
I
I'd
think
like
that was
to...
information I needed to know.
You didn't need to know that today? Okay.
Too much information. The one thing I'd like to do that I've never got to do, let's see if you've got to do it. I want to ride on that trolley on top of the flume line.
No, have never got to do that. I would love to do that.
I would love to do that.
Yes.
A buddy of ours, and it's on Facebook, you can go Google it and find it. Lewis Lee was working for Channel 12, and they got him up there. And all I could say is they need some WD-40 or something, because you could hear that thing squeaking loud and clear.
Well, when we did our documentary about
Caney Creek,
they did get to go down to the old Caney Creek Village, which unfortunately I couldn't go that day with them, and I missed that. But I'm not sure I want to ride that up there.
Oh, Rhonda,
I might ride it, if it was like inside a little box or something, but I don't want to ride in that seat hanging out the checks.
Really?
Looks out over saying, oh, there's a beam, it's getting bad. I don't think I could do that.
I just thought that was really funny. And then a lot of the older people that we interviewed said that, as children, they could just go up there and ride it.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. They just kind of, there weren't regulations as much then.
It's called OSHA and insurance and everything else now.
Did you, Barry, see our documentary?
No, I didn't.
We did one on Caney Creek.
Okay.
I'll give this to you if you promise to watch it.
I'll watch it.
We interviewed 6 people that had lived there, one as an adult, 5 as children, and we didn't even own a video camera, but we thought we could make a documentary, and it's been a lot of people have enjoyed it.
I'm gonna show my stupidity here now. Is
Go ahead.
this the Dutch settlement?
No, that is
Okay.
between just
Powerhouse number 2, where the flume line comes down. If you're facing it, down to your right, about a half mile, there's a little village there. There was 15 homes and a couple other buildings there.
Something like that.
And when they built, of course, TVA did not build that. It was built by Tennessee Electric Power Company.
Right. TEPCO.
TEPCO built this little village there because when they done all the roads got flooded, and so
it was kind of a surprise to them. They built a lake and it covered up the
they built
road.
a home they built these homes for these people there who ran the flume line and the powerhouse number 2, and they had free electricity, free water
In 1918.
Indoor
plumbing.
Indoor plumbing, and they had.
It's pretty basic.
If you wanted your house painted, you just had to do that. And of course, they lived there. Many of them lived there till 1940. Of course, in 1938, TVA said that's ours, and they said no,
We
it's
don't
not.
provide housing. Go
Supreme
away.
Court finally ruled that it was TVA because TVA was now the control all waterways, and they told these people to move out, and they had to move back into Bradley County and Polk County where they lived without electricity, running water. They went backwards in time.
Right.
And so it's pretty interesting, and there was just a handful of people still alive. Several of those people have died now also. And pretty great little story, to tell from a history standpoint.
Right. Those are interesting. That's why I mentioned the Dutch settlement, because I'm aware that up there.
That's up on top of the hill, way back up here.
Alacatusa Valley, is that how you say that?
Yeah. You want to go
it's in my book too. See, that's a Cherokee word.
Yeah.
And that was the name of their town, was Alacatusa. And it says in there that the people from the Dutch village, or in one of the history books from Polk County, said the people from the Dutch village said that there was one main chief in Alacatusa, and his name was Jack, and the river was named for him.
Right. Jack
and
River. Yeah.
Jack Tony is in my evaluations, and I said, well, that's got to be him.
There's not a lot left up there now.
Right.
No.
I understand just a few little foundations and that.
Interesting.
If you go in the summertime, you have to worry about ticks and snakes.
Right.
If you go a little bit later, about this time of year, you got to worry about the bears.
Right.
So, I mean, you just got to pick your poison there.
I would really like to. I think I found what you can see from the road just by the description, but I'd really like to see.
There's a couple of really good people. Sheriff Joe Guy out of McMinn County is quite an expert on that. And Richard Taylor, who works for, I guess he works Homeland Security. He works for one of those divisions, something of the state government. Him and Joe Guy are the two people that I know the best that could, if you could ever get them to take you up in there.
Because that would be interesting to see what you could find. Because there's, anytime you get involved with something like that, there's always more there than what you just.
That story is fascinating.
Yes. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, when people thought, well, they just come here and they could just have an isolated community, and when you have pretty daughters, isolated communities don't work real well.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
But that's how the Becklers and all those. I mean, you read those names, and those people are still in Polk County and stuff. What else, Ron? Tell them about tomorrow.
It's Sunday.
No, I'm good.
Sunday at the Cleveland Bradley County Public Library History Branch. That's the old Craig Mile House, which has been fully restored. It's beautiful. Deb will be presenting her new book, and it's, give me the name of it, Deb. It's a long name.
1836 Cherokee Nation Property Evaluations.
So if there was a Cherokee that lived in this area, she can tell you basically where they lived. Well,
within reason.
Within a reasonable
That's why I
point.
keep looking for that survey book.
But that covers what of all is modern day Polk County, Bradley County, most of Hamilton County, and some of Marion, and just a tab of Monroe County.
Well, it's a pretty good chunk of Monroe County.
But so
the Gold District.
And you'll be able to hear the names of a lot of Indians, and you'll see how much they were getting from the government. We're here to help you. And it went from $1 to about 26,000. Some people got 400, some 500, and 7,000. Just went in different varies. They lived near creeks. They didn't live near roads, so you would have to sort of guesstimate what area that would be.
I don't know, Barry, if that means that their property actually touched Candy's Creek or if that was just the nearest waterway.
Probably just the nearest. Just something to give them a. When you did your research for that, did you do most of the historical branch here? Did you go to the courthouses?
Well, what happened? Record 75 contains a lot of this information, and it's at the National Archives in Washington.
Okay.
Someone 30 years ago went up there, and she was looking for records on the Spears family, which she found. But she had the good sense to go, gee, I should copy all of this, which probably cost her a lot of money.
Right.
and she copied all of those, just Xeroxed them. Came back to this area, made 5 or 6 copies of those books, made a very loose index that goes with them. Didn't index everybody, but kind of a loose index. And it was in some folder, just, folder up here at the library. And someone mentioned it to me, and I found Judge Martin's assessment. I was doing some research on Red Clay Mission for some TV stations, and I kept going back and copying. Well, it's in that old, horrible handwriting.
Right.
Horrible handwriting, and spelling's awful and stuff. And so I started one by one typing those, and then at some point in time I said, somebody should type this up for a great reference. And so I was that somebody. It took me about 4 years, and then I added stuff. If it mentioned that they lived on Gunstalker Creek, I'd say, Ron, do you know where Gunstalker Creek is? And he said, yes, and I guess I'm going there, and I'd say yes. Yeah. And so we took dozens of colored pictures that are in the book, too, because if you live in Oklahoma, you don't know what Candy's Creek looks like. You don't know what the Chattahoochee Valley looks like. You don't know, that kind of stuff.
And a lot of times people said, they will say it's in Bradley County. Well, it was in Bradley County in 1836. But it would be in Polk County today. So,
Polk County wasn't formed till like 1840 or something. So all the Polk County properties, say that they're Bradley County. And that's the one thing that I explained in the slide on this presentation I did the other day. I said, well, if it says McMinn County, that means it was Bradley County. And if it says Bradley County, that means it was Polk County. Could be Bradley County too. And some of the ones that have, and they looked at me and I said, yes. Because see, when I first looked at them, I said, whoever did this was lost. They were saying that the Coy River's in Bradley County, and I just kind of put it to the side. I thought, well, somebody really messed up. And then I thought, oh, I understand. But it was a real, I've learned a lot doing it.
Right.
I've learned a lot doing it. And it's been it is going to be a great resource.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, there were people in Oklahoma that bought 3 copies to take back to their local library.
Right.
That kind of thing.
And look at those old records. And you probably know this, doing this kind of work, but, surveyors deal all the time in these old records. Mm-hmm. And if you have people out there that deal in these old, there's all sorts of tricks you can pull to learn to read them. One that I learned was that you could take these old records and you buy these file folders that are colored, like the blue and the yellow, and you can Xerox your records with those as filters in front of them. And it'll filter out certain things, and you can see.
Learn that trick.
Yeah, so you take like an old deed or something like that, and you put it between like in a blue Mylar sheet and Xerox it, and look at it and see what comes out. A yellow one.
Well, I mean that makes sense because we give the kids at school those little colored strips that have different.
32-inch monitors help a lot too.
That does too.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly, I would have a word. Blown up on my 32-inch monitor, have on my glasses, and using a magnifying glass.
Oh, yeah.
It was the word scions, SCIONS. I thought, what in the world is that?
Right.
And I finally found it online. And what the Cherokees were doing, now this is how advanced their agricultural system was. When their multiple fruit trees would be blooming, they mostly had peach and apple. They would go out and they would gather the blossoms off the end on a good-sized stick. And they kept them in moist sawdust. In the event there was a late frost and it would wipe out their crops, they'd go back and graft those sticks onto their trees and they'd have crops.
Really?
Yes.
That's
and
interesting.
They got to pay 12 cents a piece for those.
Really?
Because they couldn't take them with them. You got paid for the stuff you couldn't take with you.
Okay.
You couldn't take your fruit trees, your buildings, your land, those kinds of things. But you didn't get paid for your household supplies. Right. That big iron kettle, no, you didn't get paid for it, or your wagons, or your slaves, or your cattle, blankets, those kinds of things.
A lot of times when the troops came in and said, leave, if your son wasn't home tough, you just left. I mean, they left your sons, your pots, and everything else. So, Barry, let me ask you a question here. If you want to do history research about your family property, you talked about the farms and calling in. I know that Register of Deeds is always a good place, but is there other places you can go that helps look for old maps and old things? A lot of our old courthouses have burned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there's other places to go look.
Oh, yeah. There's, one of the biggest places I found doing surveying these old pieces of property, not just the state line, but other pieces of property, or the genealogy websites are full of information. And there's actually several genealogy websites that have utilities on there that will allow you to plot deeds and look at deeds and that type of thing. And you can also go on their message boards. Because these people that do their genealogy are experts. Yes. And you just send them a message and say, hey, I need to know a little something about this, you know. That's a place to look. Another place that of course, you know, the history branches of our libraries and that type of thing are always important. And I mentioned to Deb earlier the website, Dave Rumsey's map collection. He just collects old maps, and he puts them in on his website, and he has an excellent way to view them. And I've found all sorts of old Tennessee maps on there. You know, and you look at these maps, and you realize things like, if you look at the maps along the bottom of the Tennessee map, it'll have numbers 10, 11, 12, 13, where longitude is. Well, we all know our longitude around here is like 84 and 85 degrees. Well, in 1804, 1806, Thomas Jefferson decided we need to measure longitude from Washington, D.C., so he established his own prime meridian. And today, if you go to stand at the Washington Monument and you look towards the Lincoln Memorial, and you walk to the bottom of the hill and you look to the right towards the White House, there's a small monument sitting there, and that's one of the Jefferson stones where we measured longitude from. And knowing these type of things, you can use these old maps to match them to new maps. You know.
That's the thing that we sold this year at the Tennessee Trail of Tears booth. You know, in the past we sold T-shirts and those kinds of things. And I said, I bring a map to talk to people, and I'm pointing to my map, and they're trying to either take it or buy it from me.
Right.
And so we found 5 or 6 maps that are basically from this area. The one that I sent you that you guys worked on for me, that shows the Coy District.
Right.
Very attractive map. When you see the whole thing, it's a beautiful map.
Yeah.
And we used the immigration map from Fort Cass. But anyway, big hit.
Right.
I mean, people buy them.
People love
buy 'em.
maps. Yeah,
And
maps
I found somebody that laminated the top of them so that they don't wear out when you use them all the time. And so it's worked out really well.
What about
I
Civil
love
War
maps.
maps? People, of course, a lot of people are just totally enamored with
The
Civil
Merle
War
maps.
Right.
You know, where do you go to look for great Civil War maps?
Once again-
Like for Bradley County.
Right. Well, once again, I go to the first place I go to is that Dave Rumsey's website, and also go to some of the maps are scanned. If you go to, was it 10Gen Web?
Yes.
10Gen Web and the Tennessee State Library and Archives and the Library of Congress has a wonderful map collection.
Yes.
Now, you have to be a little bit more computer savvy than me to know how to save them off of there so they don't pixelate when you make them large.
That's
but
exactly right.
but
Yeah.
I somehow, sometimes, and then sometimes, like at the Tennessee State Archives, they just offer it on a lower level online, and if you want that higher level, you have to buy it from them, which I don't mind because it's not a very expensive charge. But maps are so important to us.
Oh, yeah.
As historians, and the Merle maps, I think it's Merrill from the Civil War,
Right.
but you have to put in that you want to see the Knoxville area, and then the Cleveland's on that map.
Right.
You know, you have to kind of play with it for a little while because it's hard to find Cleveland. But Ron and I sold those maps too when I did my Confederate book.
Right.
Is that we found some really good Civil War maps. One of Moccasin Bend in Chattanooga, and they're colorized and they're beautiful.
And then we had No Pone Valley Road
Yeah.
maps too.
That's right.
You know, and people seem to forget, in this digital age, we seem to forget that we actually still have libraries around that you can walk into.
Our history branch here is wonderful.
Oh, it is really. I've been in there several times, doing research over and over again, looking at.
And Margot, that took over less than a year ago, has done fabulous stuff up there. And if you love architecture, you need to go up there because when they remodeled, everything that they dug out of the walls and stuff, all the little bottles and stuff that you find it
Really?
on, she's put them all in a showcase for you to
that's
see.
neat. That's neat.
And there were no floor joists.
Right.
But the wooden floor is about 4 inches thick, and so you wouldn't need them. But she said that even the workers all stopped what they were doing to come see. When somebody went, oh my gosh, y'all come here and look. And they had to remove a small piece of the floor, so she's got it there so you can see it and hold it. It's amazing. It's something that Bradley County is proud of. It's our history branch.
Hey, we got a few more minutes here. If you'd like to call and have a question about mapping or
surveying or
any of that
TVA
stuff,
or
here's
any
your
of-
chance to call in today. We will not solve property disputes this morning.
Unfortunately.
No.
We may tell you where to go, but or where to go find out about your map.
we
too.
won't.
Most of the time in boundaries.
Yeah.
Tell everybody about next week's show.
I was going to do that
Okay.
right after we tell the phone number here, and it is
614-5553, or if you're out of the area, 423-614-5553.
You need to learn to do that in Spanish.
I have
No.
please.
uno.
No.
Okay. Don't ask me now. You're the.
We got a phone call.
Dose, I don't know. Calling you live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning. Hello. Hey, Bullet.
I just wondered, Deb, people keep coming up here asking me where certain place is up on the cemetery here. I don't know if you guys talking about mapping the cemetery or not, but I think we need to. It may be the map, but we need to get these graves up here mapped. Right?
Well, actually, they have been done, Bullet. Up at Fort Hill, there was a couple ladies that went through there that took pictures of every tombstone.
Really?
And folks can go online to findagrave.com, and I believe they can find the information there, or they can go to the history branch at the library. They have a book that has everybody that was listed in the cemetery prior to about 2007, I think. And there's a map that goes with it, and it'll at least get you in the general section. What we need is some kind of kiosk up there where the information's there and people can use it there.
Yeah, sure. Well, I didn't know that, Deb, and you've been a help to me already.
There you go. Just tell them they need to go to the library, that the librarians can help them.
Okay, Deb, it's good talking to you.
Thank you, dear.
Hey, Bullet. Cleveland put on a show last night, didn't he?
Yeah, they did. I almost froze to death over there. It wasn't that cold, but I got cold, and I actually picked Cleveland to win out the rest of the year, so I don't think I had no problem with McMahon. And but when they get in the playoffs, it'll be a different story. But I just wish all our teams good luck, Polk County and everybody. So yeah, it was a good win for Cleveland and Bradley.
It looks like Cleveland will probably finish third in the district, and that means they'll end up playing either Farragut or maybe Science Hill. I don't know which one that. So they've got a tough road. Of course, we got to play Maryville next Friday, and anytime you play Maryville, that's just a tough road. Sort of like a Tennessee-Georgia game.
For the Fires to beat Maryville.
Well, let's hope so, but it'll have to be a perfect game.
All right, we'll see you later.
All right.
Thanks.
Next Saturday, back on my date here, we're going to do a tribute to a good friend of ours, Corky Whitlock, which was known as probably he's one of the longest radio announcers in our community. Moved here in 1961, his first year here, worked for WBAC. He done the Bradley High School football team, which won the state championship. He does the boys and girls basketball teams who won the state championship. He thought he was in sports heaven when he got to Bradley County. But more importantly, that he was just a great guy in our community. I saw him the other day. He's had some health problems, but he's still with us. We're going to give him some kudos before he leaves us. How's that? It's time to talk about him.
Well,
But he's helped start the Little League baseball programs around here, which I know I played with when he started. I was there playing, so thank him. I never made the pros. Of course, Sonny Hicks was my coach, and that's probably the reason. Sonny says it was I didn't have any talent was the main reason, but that's next Saturday.
I want to ask a question. I just thought of something else. Standing Rock in Black Fox community. Have you ever run into that on any of the maps or anything, Barry?
I haven't seen anything on
Standing Rock or Hanging Rock? There's one that hung out over the road called Hanging Rock.
Okay, well, maybe I'm talking about Hanging Rock then. But it was really funny that we were talking about it, and then somebody down in the community said, well, you know that's where Drumgool lived, which was the Cherokee.
Right.
It got my attention, and you think about it, it was right at the entrance into the Black Fox community.
Right.
And it was real narrow. It's still narrow today, but there was a rock there that hung out over at and at some point in time they dynamited it, and part of it was sitting down on the ground. But it would make sense to me that it would have been a.
Yeah, I don't think
marker.
it's where they hung people. I think it was just hanging out over the road. It was called
no.
hanging
But
rock.
somebody, there was an incident that happened there during the Civil War
Oh,
that
sure,
they were talking
yeah.
about. But anyway, I just thought maybe you'd run into that somewhere along the way, like those big red rocks down in the Red Hill Valley.
Right.
Or everywhere.
So now, Barry, your history group that you run with, if someone had a great idea for a project, how do they get hold of you guys?
Well, they can get a hold of me, or they can get a hold of, if you go on the web to the Surveyors Historical Society.
Surveyors Historical Society.
SHS. They've got a website. You go out there and you can, they even have, what they have every year, they have a rendezvous in September where they get together and, like I said, they recreate a historical survey. We had one in here, the rendezvous was here about 5 or 6 years ago when we met down at the Southern Belle down on the river and did some mapping over in the Chickamauga battlefield.
Oh, I love it.
The way that they did the mapping back then. They used different techniques back then. Of course, they used plane tables, which is a way of actually doing your mapping and surveying all at once out in the field. And so, but yeah, anytime, if they have anything like that, you know, you can go out there and drop them a line because they're always interested in historical type things.
I'd say
You say you actually dress period dress. Do you use period equipment?
Yes, use
You
period.
don't bring your little electronic thing here on the side, do you?
No. As a matter of fact, the guys, a lot of the guys, not me, but a lot of the guys in the group are collectors of instruments, old instruments, and they actually they buy and sell these old solar compasses and that type of things. And yeah, they use period equipment, and they dress in the exact period clothing and do the survey just like they did 200 years ago.
That's amazing.
So
That's great.
I'd say Moccasin Bend would be an interesting place to survey.
Oh,
You
yes,
know, the
yes.
National Park Service has bought a big chunk of
Right.
it, and we will have a welcome center there, a visitor center there, in the next probably 3 or 4 years.
Barry,
That is amazing.
Yes.
I mean, it's and long overdue, and they should have saved it before they ever built the hospital there because it tells the history of this area all the way back to almost prehistoric times.
Barry, in your craft, doing that historical, does that give you a better understanding when you go see these old maps and the way they read things? Does it actually going out physically looking at the sun like we were talking about? Does that give you just say,
perspective.
Does the light come on there once in a while and says, oh, I understand what they was trying to do now?
Oh yeah, because you have to understand back in those today we go out with our handheld GPS and we find points, but back in those days, they had to understand navigational astronomy, which is something I've worked really hard and I still don't understand it as well as I should. How to guide by the stars, and so to understand that's one thing that we talked about with that map that you sent me. Like they could determine latitude fairly easy, but not longitude. So your maps sometimes in the north-south direction are very accurate, but in the east-west direction they're not. Because
And mine was kind of funky.
That's right. They had, so those are things you learn by looking at these old historical maps.
I sent Barry an email and I said, it is not beyond me to ask someone I barely know to do me a favor.
Yeah.
Can you superimpose the present day counties over this map?
Yeah.
And he sent it back and said, he said, well, what scale is this to? And I'm like, I don't know. It's 1830.
8 to 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, they had to kind of wiggle. My map looks a little wiggly under there, but the counties are right there and you can see them, and I think that will help people visualize what I'm talking about. So tomorrow when I do my presentation, I'm going to use that map.
Yeah.
I was afraid. I had everything running on it. My videos and everything were working, and I was afraid to touch it to try to read. You know that feeling.
You get a presentation down, you don't want to mess with it. Don't mess with it.
We got a minute for about one more call here. It's 614-5553 if you want to call us. Now's the time. Or if you're not, you have to wait till next week. Barry Savage has been with us here today.
Very interesting.
And I learned a lot. I mean, I learned, of course, I know those Georgia folks just need to stay that mile down that way from us. We don't want them coming toward us.
Barry, was it Edward Townsend or someone that laid off downtown Cleveland?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the name, yeah.
And they said that maybe he had a wee bit of a drinking problem, and there are some streets that aren't quite as straight as they need to be. Or do you think he was just trying to adjust to the...
Well,
what do you think?
And
then we had Mouse Creek and stuff was all over everything downtown.
Right.
I mean, they kind of, over the years, have kind of corralled it in.
Nobody laid out Mouse Creek Road.
No. Oh, mercy. Yeah, I told people that in Oklahoma that they could go to see Samuel Parks' grave at Henniker Chapel, but to drive slow and be careful.
That's exactly right. Yeah, but no, these old surveys, a lot of the surveys that they just surveyed part of it and then they would copy it from other things. But yeah, I've never known a surveyor that liked to drink. I don't.
No,
no, that doesn't happen.
And I think the building of our railroad here is extremely interesting. You know, they started out and they were building the roadbed, and then those people would go bankrupt, or what called bankrupt, then they'd go broke, and then they'd change the railroad. But in McMinn County, they made a railroad bed that they never used, and it became some main road.
Yes.
I don't remember which road it is, but we're going to mark it for the Trail of Tears because we know the people walked right down it.
You know, a lot of people don't know those old, what they call bow maps, which are the maps, the old railroad maps. The state of Tennessee have now scanned those, and they're all online.
Where are they?
I can show you. It's the state of Tennessee website. I can't, right off the top of my head, I'd have to click on it to find it. But you can actually find those old railroad maps.
Now, was the railroads pretty much north, south, east, west, or did they?
No, they went
not
just
in
about
Tennessee. They
no.
couldn't be.
Well, we know that it comes to Cleveland. It comes pretty straight in here. Then, whoop, we'll take his big right turn to come to what is. It was at Deer in the Waters place, and then took a big right turn and said, "No, we're going to go through Cleveland or Andrew Taylor's place."
Right? Which I
one vote.
I would really like to map
And
out.
he wasn't eligible to vote. He was an illegal vote. I'm just telling you right now.
The Indian Warpath, Old Federal Road, and the Stagecoach Road through Bradley County.
See, that's a project that the college students would love to be involved in.
Okay.
We can work something out.
Barry, in these last few minutes, anything you'd like to add?
Not that I can think of, other than, people out there, and of course they can get in touch with you. People out there, as you go through things like family Bibles and old cardboard boxes under your bed and that kind of thing, you find land records. Those things are so valuable.
Take them to the library.
Take them somewhere.
It will not damage them to have them scanned one time.
Right. Scanned and cataloged, because those things are a wealth of knowledge, as we try to not only recreate our past but build towards the future. I mean, those things are important.
Well, and it's when I told the people that I had done this, tried to make sense of these property evaluations, I said it was like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle that I didn't know what the puzzle was going to look like, but I knew pieces were missing, and those are the missing pieces.
Right.
That in great grandpa's diary, or where he just made notes, would make a big difference. Thank you so much for being here today. It has been so entertaining and enlightening and educational. We appreciate it.
Every week we tell you to get those pictures from up and under the bed, and now we need to get the land deeds and old maps and things, and get those out. All those things, pictures, stories, all that is very, very important. And it's up to you to say that history. Find the oldest person in your family and start interviewing them. Start just asking them about them growing up, if nothing else, and who their mom and dad, when their grandparents are. It'd be great if you're doing genealogy later on. Say, well, I know who my great-grandmother was because my grandmother told me who it was.
Right.
So you've got to learn to do that. And so we hope that you'll take time to save history, get those archival labels, archival ink down at Joe Rogers, write on those labels, put them on the back of that document so it don't bleed through. And as always, we say, we'll always remember Pearl Harbor.
But will we remember Aunt Pearl?
Oh, we don't know yet. Well, we'll see you next week, folks.
Old Town Cleveland.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WHOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
At Buy Here, Pay Here USA, we don't just sell cars, we buy them. Bring your car, truck, or SUV down to Buy Here, Pay Here USA, and we'll give you a free appraisal with no obligation. We pay top dollar for most cars, so before you trade in your vehicle, come see us for an appraisal. At Buy Here, Pay Here USA,